Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. This is part of She's Arab's Arab Women's Social Impact Series, and we are super proud to be partnering with NaTakallam on this session. We are basically marking World Refugee Day, which passed on June 20th. I know it's July 1st, but we just made it. This period marks one of the largest migration flows in history. There are more than 68.5 million people who are forcibly displaced, and 40% of them are in the MENA region. This poses a variety of challenges to both, obviously, host countries and refugees. You know, issues like basic needs from water, sanitation, food, education, housing, you name it. And the pandemic nowadays, COVID-19, makes it all the more difficult to all relevant stakeholders, specifically on women and children, of course. I believe that the rise of digital and social media in general has made us all a lot more aware about, the plight of refugees and what happens with them. But at the end of the day, refugees are ordinary people like you and me, looking to rebuild their lives that was taken away from them. And today's session really aims to change the perception of what a refugee is or looks like, to raise awareness on this plight, and basically do it through storytelling and conversation. So this is a very casual, informal session. Please feel free to jump in with questions. If you use the tab of raising your hand, I can unmute your microphone to share your questions. You can also always send your questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. We will also obviously shed some light on the amazing work that NaTakallam is doing and the UNHCR is doing on the ground. So just a quick word about She's Arab. We're a speakers platform dedicated to address the issue of underrepresentation of Arab women in business leadership and at speaking events. As for NaTakallam, we're proud to be partnering with you today as an award-winning woman-founded social enterprise that delivers high-quality, impactful language, translation, and cultural exchange services by highly skilled refugees and displaced persons worldwide. We'll hear more about their amazing work later from Aline and Asala. Our first speaker is Aline Sarah. She's the co-founder and CEO of NaTakallam. She's a Lebanese New Yorcan who studied psychology at Tufts in Boston. She is a humanitarian at heart. She moved to Beirut and worked in conflict resolution and human rights before transitioning into journalism, and basically ended up combining her interest in learning Arabic herself with her passion as a humanitarian to benefit refugees, and launched NaTakallam. And to share a personal narrative of displacement, we have Asala with us today. We're so happy you're here with us today, Asala. Asala is in her 30s and she's originally from Syria. She has a bachelor's degree in economy and e-commerce. She was a middle school teacher in Syria before moving due to the conflict, and she's now resettled in Italy, which is where she's joining us from today. Asala will speak about her experience teaching at NaTakallam and becoming an experienced teacher for children's education. And last but not least, to share firsthand experience of dealing with refugees on the ground, we have Shaden Khallaf, the head of the MENA Policy Unit and Senior Policy Advisor at UNHCR. Shaden is an award-winning international expert on refugee and humanitarian affairs and an advocate for human dignity and women's empowerment. She's also one of She's Arab supporters, so thank you for that, Shaden. Her expertise also includes, of course, international human rights law, gender policy, protection of refugee women and children, advocacy, and the sustainable development goals, to name a few. She's also a lecturer of public affairs at the School of Public Affairs of the American University in Cairo, and also at the Center for Strategic Studies at the University of Jordan, and is a regular speaker in academic and diplomatic circles. So I will start by handing over to Shaden to put things in perspective for us and tell us a little bit more about refugees in the MENA region. So Shaden, over to you.
Thank you so much, Samar. It really is a pleasure to be with you this afternoon and to be with this lovely group of speakers, Aline and Asala, and to be part of the She is Arab community. And I indeed am a supporter, and I'm very much behind the purpose of She is Arab, and you can continue to count on my advocacy on your behalf and for women in the Arab region always. So thank you very much for the inclusion and the invitation. I'm also very pleased that you are focusing on the situation of refugees in the region, given that, as you mentioned, MENA hosts the lion's share of the global displaced population figure. And just before World Refugee Day, actually, we announced that the total number of refugees had increased to just under 80 million, which is now about 1% of humanity. So I think that really puts things in perspective, and it highlights the extent to which this is an issue that is continuously growing, unfortunately. So it's the highest ever recorded figure that UNHCR has noted. And I think it really points to the fact that conflicts continue to either remain unresolved or new ones continue to erupt, leaving people to pay the price of these wars that are ravaging the region in particular, but of course other places in the world also. Having said that, I think it's important to highlight that the situation in the region is not as difficult and as challenging as it is. There are glimmers of hope here and there are opportunities for us to continue to build on the strength and the resilience of the refugees and the displaced populations themselves. This is really, I think, a very important element to consider, and I'm glad that through the speakers that you have very carefully selected, we can hear more about that also, and I'll try to shed some light on how at UNHCR we want to continue to build on this and to really highlight that refugees are not a burden, as is often assumed to be the case and often perceived in the media and otherwise, but that really we can look at how refugees can bring contributions to the host societies and really highlight their strength and their value to the societies and communities where they live. And I think actually I'll just open a brief parenthesis and say that as COVID unfolded throughout the world, there was such a wave of panic that overtook so many of us about the inability to move, or curfews and lockdowns and shortages of supplies. And in effect, this is how so many millions of people live on a daily basis. These are the challenges that they face, and this is the experience that they have gained in dealing with. So I think we have a lot to learn from them, actually, and this is something we try to do, is really highlight how the resilience of refugees is something that we can learn from broader as an international community, and how we can really highlight that throughout our advocacy in general. Now, if we were to talk a little bit...
Shaden, sorry to interrupt you, because at the beginning of the pandemic, I actually used this analogy myself. You know, as a Palestinian, I used to say, you know, Palestinians have always lived under curfews and so on, and suddenly we started living the same way, but everywhere around the world. So it's absolutely true.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that we were on the same wavelength in that regard. So, and I think it's something that we need to continue to raise and to share, and we can do that through stories and individuals, as you are doing today. Now, to talk a little bit briefly about the policy framework for displacement in the region, we do, of course, have well-established offices and presences throughout. However, the region is one that is fraught with conflict, as I mentioned earlier. So we have the Syrian conflict, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, and others. And unfortunately, none of the conflicts in the region look like they are nearing any kind of political solution. And that is what we actually need. We need political solutions to humanitarian problems. We can't fix humanitarian problems with humanitarian solutions. We try to put our hand, you know, just it's like a band-aid until broader, bigger solutions are found. Our previous our previous High Commissioner, who's now the Secretary General, used to say that what we do as humanitarians is like putting a band-aid on someone who needs brain surgery. So the solution is really beyond us, but we can continue to advocate on behalf of those who need these solutions for them to be found. And we heard a lot of that just earlier this week during the Brussels conference, which many of you may have been following, about the need for solutions to be found so that refugees can live in dignity and figure out whether they can return home, whether they have more prospects for resettlement, or whether they can be further included in the host communities where they are living. So what we tried to advocate for during the COVID pandemic, which, as you know, was quite a surprise, took the whole world by surprise, of course, was to advocate for the inclusion, at least initially, in the health and the medical services provided to nationals in the region. And I think by and large that was quite successful, in the sense that refugees in most countries had access to the same health services as national populations, in terms of at least getting tested, in terms of being able to access prevention measures, in terms of being able to access health professionals when needed. However, what we have noted very clearly is that beyond the health crisis, we're now moving very, very quickly into a protection and poverty crisis. And the risk is that 8.3 million people will fall deeper into poverty throughout the year if we are unable to deal with the consequences of COVID. And as a result, what we are now trying to do is assess the socioeconomic impact of COVID on the refugee populations and how that compares to those of the nationals in the region, whether it's the Lebanese or the Jordanians, who are already facing their own socioeconomic, geographic, geostrategic, demographic challenges, and how we can continue to support these governments and populations further in hosting refugees and in including them in their national socioeconomic support and safety nets where possible. And these are very tricky issues, very politically sensitive, very also economically demanding. I mean, the requirements financially for doing this are in the billions of dollars. So it's not an easy undertaking. However, we continue to be hopeful and continue to count on the support of the international community in this regard. In the meantime, what we see, unfortunately, is people really, really struggling to survive. We have examples of people, unfortunately, committing suicide in some parts of the region because they cannot cope with the impact of the economic downturn and resulting from COVID. We have reduction in meals, families and parents and mothers who are not eating so that their kids can eat. We have people who are being evicted from their homes, sharing overcrowded and unhealthy living spaces. So really the impact is becoming quite severe. And we're working increasingly also on trying to support that with development funding and working with development actors and private businesses and the private sector in general, and with civil society partners who are critical to this undertaking. And so maybe I'll stop here for now, so as to come back to some of these issues later on if there are questions about them. But I think just the one last point that I'll say is that in all of this, the voices of refugees have been absolutely critical. And we are very keen to benefit from, as I mentioned earlier, their contributions and the examples that they can show us of how to manage these crises and how to stay resilient and how to stay strong and how to keep hoping, because this is really what we need. We have to keep the hope going, otherwise we will all fall into despair.
For sure. I think this definitely puts things in perspective, Shaden. And with the slides that you have very kindly shared with us as well, if you can just clarify to the audience, I'm not sure if the audience are aware, but I know we use the term refugees very generally, but if you can maybe just shed some light about, the difference between refugees, IDPs, and asylum seekers, just so, we put things in perspective as well.
Absolutely. Yes, happy to do so. So, a refugee is someone who leaves his or her country of origin, crosses an international border, and is unable to return to that country of origin, given their fear of either being persecuted due to political opinion, or their race, or their ethnicity, or their background. Increasingly, gender is also an area that we are looking at as a grounds for granting refugee status, or as a result of conflict and destruction and devastation in their country of origin. An internally displaced person is someone who is facing those similar threats, but who has not yet crossed an international border to seek that protection from the international community. They are still within their own territory, their national territory, but they are in need of humanitarian assistance and unable to return to their area of origin, at least. And an asylum seeker is someone who has claimed this need for international protection, but has not yet been granted it. So in general, when it's not in a conflict situation, we go through each asylum seeker request individually. We assess each request. However, in times like these, where we have large numbers and influxes that are from countries that are facing armed conflict, it is what we call a group determination, and then we have no need to identify or to determine each individual status. But by and large, the needs for many of these groups are similar, with different legal frameworks, of course, applying to each one.
Understood. And clearly from the image we see in front of us, Syria has, you know, it tops the list or comes second after Colombia in terms of numbers of the internally displaced persons. So that tells us a lot about the gravity, I guess, of the situation. And you already shed some light on the current protection challenges. And I bet, you know, we'll come to that later in the during the session. To understand, especially the challenges faced by women, I think, in this crisis, a topic that you are personally very passionate about as well. So we'll come back to that. I'd like to move on now to Aline and hear from you, Aline, about NaTakallam. I'm a big fan. I love what you do. And I know Shaden does too. She mentioned it before.
I do.
So please tell us more about the concept, the business model, and how it works.
Thank you, Samar and Shaden, and you know, thank you for having NaTakallam. And it's really also great to see a lot of familiar names in the attendees. So hi to some of our fellow supporters and students. And of course, thank you, Asala, for joining us to share about your experience with NaTakallam. So I'm going to be sharing some slides to kind of walk you through the journey of NaTakallam and how it happened, because it kind of happened, actually. It wasn't, you know, it's been an adventure, and it's been a beautiful adventure. So I'm just going to share my screen as well. Here we go. And so I think, can everyone see my screen right now? Yeah, great. So I think Shaden has laid the groundwork for you know what we're going to talk about, which is the current situation for globally displaced and forcibly displaced persons today. We've almost hit about 80 million, and so in addition to this, a very small number actually get resettled to countries where they are actually able to fully restart their lives, get a right to work, etc. And so NaTakallam was actually born in Lebanon. I'm myself Lebanese, born and raised in New York. And just seeing the situation for so many Syrians who had fled the conflict and came to Lebanon, but actually just had no future ahead. Also realizing how much talent and skill there is, and just thinking of what can we do to actually support them, in light of the fact that also Lebanon is itself struggling. And I mean, this was 5 years ago, so, you know, not to mention today where Lebanon is. And so I was actually in New York, and I was just thinking about this. And at the same time, as a Lebanese American, I've struggled my whole life with Arabic. And I was looking for ways to practice my Arabic from New York. And I had actually always dreamed of going to Syria to immerse myself in Arabic, because in Lebanon, we speak French and English. And that's very much how I speak, but it hit me that while I can't go to Syria anymore to do this immersion, so many Syrians are in Lebanon, and having tutored myself in French and English, and seeing how powerful of a relationship I had developed with my tutors and my tutees, I just had a bit of a light bulb moment, which was, you know, if I were in Lebanon, even though I can't go to Syria, so many Syrians have come to Lebanon, and they could be my tutor. And while they're not working in the formal economy and getting a formal employment, they're still getting access to an income and a really kind of dignified type of work that would also generate friendship and dialogue, because I think that that's really what we need, right? We need to change the political wills, and that will start with changing the narrative around refugees and getting to know displaced persons and hearing their story. So this is the originating story, and what was the new aspect is that we're also living in the era of the World Wide Web. And so even though I wasn't in Lebanon at that time and I was in New York, I realized that actually people learn languages over Skype, and refugees are also, millions of them are actually connected, right? So this is a classic photo we've been seeing. There's been stories about how we live in the era of the connected refugee. And so refugees are very often using their smartphones and their internet connection as a lifeline. And at the same time, if you're looking at, you know, the way the world works today, there was already a growing demand for online language services, with COVID, that has exponentially grown. And so NaTakallam is born at the intersection of these three tenets, which is the fact that there's millions of highly skilled, connected refugees. And when I say refugees, I refer to, you know, IDPs, displaced persons in general. We also live in a world where there's, as I mentioned, a growing demand for language services that can actually be done online and through the gig economy. And while we've heard so many stories about digital nomadism, the truth is that refugees are actually forced digital nomads. And so why not, you know, engage them in this online world? And so this is how the very simple idea was born. And so here we have Asada, who is tutoring Kate, who's all the way in Baltimore. And so it's a very simple win-win solution. Kate wants affordable, flexible language practice with native speakers. And Asala is getting income, and she's also developing her teaching skills and soft skills. And really along the way, we're creating human connection, which is so important to the work we do. So to just kind of explain the different services we offer, we were born with a very simple concept, which was conversational sessions. So even if refugees weren't themselves teachers, they would be language partners. And so they could support individuals who had studied Arabic and were especially interested in the Levantine dialect. And of course, since then we've grown. So we offer now, we work with Syrians, but also Arabic-speaking refugees from Yemen, Iraq, Egypt, Sudan. I mean, we have a Palestine as well. So we have a variety of dialects available. We naturally added languages as we grew. So we offer Persian, taught by Iranian and Afghan refugees, Spanish, taught by Venezuelan and Central American displaced persons, and French, taught by Francophone African refugees. And we also developed a integrated Arabic program, which blends formal Arabic, Fusha, and dialect. And that was in partnership with the head of the Arabic department at Cornell University. And we've been able to provide trainings on this curriculum to several of our language partners. And Asala is so strong that she even teaches it for Egyptian dialects. So, so it's been nice to see that. In addition to the one-on-one language programs we offer, we decided to take our programs to schools, universities, communities, and office settings. So we have partnerships with dozens of higher education institutions and universities, including Yale, Berkeley, Tufts, Columbia, where NaTakallam is used as a practice tool for people studying Arabic, for example, but also as a complement to classroom studies on migration, displacement, politics, history. And so our language partners come in as a virtual teacher to share their experience live, really bringing to life the subject matter that is being studied. We also do that with schools with children as young as 6, 7, and 8-year-olds who are learning directly from refugees about their story, and also a couple of words in the language. We've also taken this program to office and community settings, and we call this program Refugee Voices, because we really believe that there's nothing as powerful as just hearing one individual story in depth and actually having a conversation. And finally, in an effort to increase the income opportunities to our language partners and conversationalists, we realized that translation is another type of job that can be done remotely, leveraging language skills of displaced people. So we also offer translation services, doing all kinds of translation work, documents, websites, films, documentary transcripts, etc. So this is just a couple of photos of some of our conversation partners, and Asala is here herself, so we'll save the time to hear from her directly. And just to share a bit about our journey, to date, we've dispersed to displaced persons over $800,000 through NaTakallam. More than 9,000 individuals have used NaTakallam for language classes as part of university partnerships and Refugee Voices sessions. We've delivered services to over 80 different translation clients and have been present in a number of school and university programs. Beyond the income, what we're noticing is, so NaTakallam is for 60% of our language partners and translators, their only source of income. But what's more fascinating is the ripple effect, that through the human connections, a lot of our language partners are finding other small part-time jobs and friendships, of course, and even resettlement opportunities. We also have partnerships with programs where refugees are actually getting training, and to sustain themselves while getting training or pursuing educational opportunities, they're using NaTakallam as a support to sustain themselves financially. Just to, I mentioned a couple of our academic partners, and a few of our organizational clients include major NGOs, but also corporations. And besides what we're seeing with COVID, it is important to remember that with climate change, we're going to be facing, according to the World Bank, an estimated 140 million more people who will be forced to flee their homes due to climate change. Finally, I'm just going to highlight a couple of things related to being a social enterprise and kind of having the startup mindset versus a traditional NGO and traditional forms of aid. And NaTakallam is a market-based solution grounded in market needs, meaning that on one side of a market, we have millions of highly skilled displaced people who are just looking for a platform on which to exercise their talents. And on the other end, there are users, organizations, individuals around the world who are looking for this type of flexible, affordable language learning or language service opportunity. As a startup, we're able to take much more risk because we're so small, we're very nimble. And we kind of report more to our users, and our users or our customers include both those who pay for the service, but also the refugees we support. So we kind of look at them more as customers rather than beneficiaries. I mentioned that, we started small, took risks. So we start very specific in the startup world, and then you scale after, doing a lot more quick prototyping, which is why you can be so nimble. As I mentioned earlier, we're reporting to our customers rather than to donors. So that creates a very different type of work, because donors can sometimes have very rigid long-term implementation frameworks, which in the context in which we're working isn't as easy, because we're facing a protracted crisis, things change quickly, we have to adapt and evolve. Finally, refugees within NaTakallam are not passive recipients to aid. They're generating their own income by delivering rewarding services that enable them to share their story, their language, and their culture. And finally, through today and the technology we have, we're able to transcend borders, which is why Asala started with us in Lebanon, and she's still with us now from Italy. I think I'm dragging on a bit. So I mentioned the ripple effect, but this is Rait, another one of our language partners. And his journey has been from being stuck in Lebanon with no ID to being at the Vatican with Susan Sarandon talking about NaTakallam. And, this is just a photo of several of our language partners from across the world. So because I know we want to make sure we have time for Asala and for questions, I'll stop there. So I'm going to stop my screen share. And I think that, Asala, I'm passing it on to you. Can you maybe tell us a bit about how your life was in Syria, what you were doing, because I think you weren't a teacher back then, and how it's been when you went from Syria to Lebanon and then to Italy.
Okay, so my name is Asala. I'm from Syria, and in Syria I had a normal life. I have 3 brothers. Now one in Syria with my parents, the second in Lebanon, the third one in Italy. So in Syria, I studied in school in my town, and after that I studied electronic marketing in university, and I worked as a teacher in middle school. I love teaching, and I would like to spend my time, especially with kids. So it was. I was very happy to be a teacher in the school. After that, I worked as employed in office, but it was boring for me because I always like to work as a teacher. So in general, I had a normal life in Syria, like many people in Syria, but The life was a little bit difficult in Syria. So after a little time, it's like the revolution started, and all Syrian people have a new life, but it was very difficult. So, and after that, it's take another ship, and it become like civil war. So it was very difficult, and many millions of people displaced and escaped to Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and many countries. So I was in Syria until 2013. In the end of 2013, I left Syria to Lebanon. My husband is a journalist and political activist, so he has a lot of problem, and he arrested twice before escaped to Lebanon. So he escaped to Lebanon, and after that, in the end of 2013, I left from Syria to Lebanon. And in Lebanon, it was not easy to find a job also, because it's difficult also for Lebanese people. So and a small country like Lebanon accepted more than 1 million of Syrian refugees. It was too much for small country. So it was difficult to find job also for Lebanese people. And I, as like Syrian refugees, it was very difficult to find a job in Lebanon. So,
Asala, do you want to talk a bit about how you found out about NaTakallam and how it's been so far? And maybe you can share, Asala has become our expert children tutor as well. So in addition to being able to teach Egyptian, she also teaches children as young as 4 years old online. And so you can imagine you have to be very good at keeping their attention. So maybe you could share a bit about that and tell us, you know, what is it that you like most about NaTakallam and where your students are from?
okay, so in Lebanon, as I told you, it was very difficult to find job, and I looked for a job for more than a year and tried to make interview and to find something, but I couldn't. So after that, I have a friend in Paris. He told me about NaTakallam, and she told me that there is a project you can work with them. You can be like Arabic teacher. You can work online without any problem. So it was. I was very happy to get this job, because my husband found his job in Beirut, and we lived in small town in mountain. So it was easier for us to live in a small town, not in Beirut, because it's very expensive, and the people in Beirut was there were a lot of problems. So we prefer to be in small town. So my husband went to his job in the morning, and I still alone at home. So it was difficult. I tried to do many things, like tried to practice my English or read books, but it was difficult also because I had my job in Syria and in Lebanon without family, without friends, alone at home, and so it was really difficult. So with NaTakallam, I have a lot of friends everywhere. America, Australia, Europa, also in Arabic countries. I have friends because they live for their job in Dubai or in another Arabic country. So I rebuilt new relationships with many students, and also they visited me in Lebanon, also in Italy. So some of them, for many reasons, cannot go on with their sessions, but they still write to me and ask about my news. So it's really was very important for me to get friends to share my culture and my language for many people everywhere, to have a job, to get money. So it was very, very important for me, especially in Lebanon. And I was surprised how many people want to learn our language, and also I learned many, many things from them. And one time, Aline asked me if I can do with the kids. So it was a little bit strange for me. And I get 2 students. One is 5 years, and the second one was 8 years. So it was really a challenge, because it's not easy to keep them focusing with you via Skype. So I create my materials like videos, stories, photos, some games to keep them, like to make the session more funny for them, and to keep them with me for 30 minutes and 1 hour or 1 hour. It's not easy. So this was my first experience, and after that I have tens of young and kids students, and I interesting, and I love teaching them, because teaching them Arabic and another things.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Asala, for sharing your story. It's truly inspirational, and it's amazing how you now have your own, self-sustaining income. Maybe to build on your story, I'd like to go back to Shaden and ask her, from your experience, Shaden, on the ground, are there any specific challenges that women refugees face that are unique to their gender? Like, there are a lot of resources now, obviously, talking about how the pandemic has actually exacerbated the situation, made it worse for women, with them being at the front lines of COVID. And I think it also applies to refugees. So would love to hear about that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sama, for that. And first of all, I would like to echo your appreciation for what Asala just shared. I think it really is an incredibly inspiring story, and one that I think hopefully is representative also of many, many others, and one that can continue to be an example for many others. So thank you for that. I think definitely women have been at the forefront of COVID, and they have, refugee women in particular, have been further disproportionately affected by the pandemic, given that many of them are single female-headed households, that they are solely responsible for taking care of their children, as well as being the main breadwinners for the family, and in situations where, in general, throughout the region, refugees are not legally allowed to work. So they have been employed in the informal economy, which has been one of the hardest hit parts of the economies of the region, as everybody is undoubtedly aware. So they have been disproportionately affected economically, for those who have been female-headed households, for those who are not heading the household as such, but are part of a broader family. We have anecdotal evidence of increased incidences of violence, aggression, domestic issues, which has applied both to refugee women as well as other women, unfortunately, and children as well have been unfortunately impacted by this. We have definitely increased our outreach for psychosocial and mental health support through remote means, because we also were unable to access the community for a while under lockdown in many parts of the region. However, we are slowly resuming that and really placing an emphasis on that. Having said that, there have also been, prior to COVID, perhaps we can take a step back and look at some positive examples, which, similar to what Asala said, really just built on the individual skills and initiatives of the refugee women. We have a story that is now famous of a Syrian woman in Jordan who was initially signing up for a jewelry design course and ended up taking a plumbing course by some strange coincidence, and started her own plumbing business in Jordan, and is now responsible for employing a large number of both Syrian and Jordanian women, and has opened up this niche of women, this niche of opportunities for women who want to learn how to do plumbing, and there's a need for it in the community, and it's now a growing and successful business. So that's something that we are also looking at how we can replicate, and we're trying to be creative also in who we partner with as UNHCR. So we had tried also to explore, and we were exploring in a partnership with the Jordan Fashion Week to see how refugee women can contribute to producing a line that would have been displayed at Jordan Fashion Week. Unfortunately, that got delayed by COVID, but we hope to continue to work on that. And there are other examples in Egypt where there are initiatives called Nile Furat, where again, refugee women are working with Egyptian women side by side to work on both sewing, packaging, advertising, and managing a business. So this is again the need to have a holistic perspective and to involve the private sector in supporting initiatives like this. And we have a lot of support actually for this particular initiative from high, influential cultural influencers and actors and others who can change the narrative, because we need to rely on them also to tip the balance in favor of this change narrative and what you were mentioning earlier, somewhat about the perception of refugees as a burden, as someone who is reliant, who is dependent, who is weak, who is vulnerable, that we really are working hard to overturn.
Wow, these are a lot of great points and examples that you shared, especially the plumbing one. I remember having read about that. It's a great story. Aline, maybe to build on that point as well, can you give us a reflection of the demographics of your conversation partners or the refugees? Obviously, they join you from all over because now you provide so many languages and it's not just solely Arabic. But I think obviously you are contributing to changing the narrative by what you're doing. So if you can tell us about the demographics and also tell us about how you managed to secure the access to technology to your beneficiaries, because I think this has been cited as one of the major challenges. I'm sure Shaden will agree probably now also for access to education for children in refugee camps and so on. It's quite a hindrance with the pandemic these days. So I'd love to hear your reflections on that.
Sure, yeah. So I think to zoom out, I just want to share a general thing about social entrepreneurship is that you're coming in as a small actor and the problems are so massive that you have to actually really pick a subset of where you're going to create your impact. And NaTakallam was very clear from the beginning that we were looking at the segment of the Syrian population that had come from a middle class background and professional background. So most of our tutors are, architects, lawyers, nurses, artists, musicians. And so we believe that these individuals are currently in a state where they're going to be robbed of a future and all their human capital is going to be lost. And most NGOs and most of the kind of traditional humanitarian sectors have to kind of follow a mandate where they're tackling the most vulnerable. And I don't even like the most vulnerable as a word because it's a little bit hard to choose what vulnerability means, right? Someone might come from a middle-class background, but given the story they've endured, if they've been, subject to torture and things like that, so even that word vulnerable is a bit complex. But we were very clear from the subset that this is where we're entering, because NaTakallam, and someone asked how we're, fundraising or how we're operating. We started with no money, nothing, right? Startup, scrappy from zero. And this is what I mean by a market-based solution, right? These millions of individuals who are already connected and already have this background and who do need access to a stepping stone, to this income, to this restored sense of hope and feeling that there is a future out there. So most of our language partners and translators right now remain Syrian because that's really how we were born. We also, as I mentioned, work with a few other Arabic speaking communities, and I mentioned the other regions. I would also say we do actively try to hire women, but we're not strictly women, because also, again, when we originally launched, we were looking at the type of candidates that were reaching out to us. And so, some of the profiles we were seeing, very often Syrian men, they actually left because, the mother and the children stayed, but they fled because they were drafted by Assad's army or were going to be drafted to join the Islamist militants. So they really had to leave in these conditions where They very often left without an ID, without their passports. And so, you know, in that moment, you know, this was, you know, we just came to life quite organically. That being said, our team is proactively trying to constantly see when we can hire women. And for women, NaTakallam is especially practical because they do it from home. They can do it with their children on the lap. I get photos of tutors with their babies and their students with their babies. And so the babies are now talking over Skype and getting to know each other. So it is definitely a fact that for women and women refugees, NaTakallam is especially helpful and interesting. So, so that's to answer you know, the demographics question. I'll just answer, there was a couple of questions in the chat. I think they were directed at NaTakallam. So you can visit our website, and at the bottom you should find a place that says where you can apply to become a language tutor. And you can always email NaTakallam, info@natakallam.com if you want to refer candidates. But I must say that NaTakallam is, you know, we've really had a bootstrapping journey, which means we never got a huge influx of funding from any organization. We've done a lot of competitions. We've pitched NaTakallam, and we've been able to get some small grants here and there. And the other way of surviving is through our self-generated revenue. So, you know, that's also an interesting challenge and journey of the social enterprise model. But the truth is that we will continue to grow when people sign up to NaTakallam, when people use us for their language needs, when people tell, if you're in a company and they need translation services, have them consider NaTakallam. If you have colleagues and they have children and you know, maybe NaTakallam would be a nice addition to a class. If you know someone who wants to learn Spanish, you know, they can learn through NaTakallam. And all of this helps NaTakallam grow. And so even though right now, I mean, we are by far outnumbered by the number of refugees applying. Every day we have to turn down applications because we don't just onboard refugees and hope that they'll get students. NaTakallam actively makes sure that if we onboard someone, they are getting a minimum of income through their work. And we also work with, you know, our team of language tutors to support them if we see that they're not performing as well. And so when people sign up to NaTakallam, we have someone who's manually, and some of you might know her, Carmela, because you get her emails, you know, she's working to look at, okay, Asala got X number of students, maybe this tutor didn't get as many, so let's try and even it out, because our goal is deep impact. So in social impact, you can talk about breadth of impact versus depth of impact. And we really do want to keep growing with depth, but continue to increase our reach. And the best way to do that, because we have a revenue model and we don't need to take funding like an NGO that doesn't have a revenue model, is really through helping spread the word about our services.
That's wonderful. Thank you for attending to these questions. I please keep them coming, and we'll keep addressing them as we go along. I want to also go back to Shaden, and hot out of the oven, as they say. Just yesterday was the end of the Supporting the Future of Syria and the Region Brussels conference, and there were like major pledges, you know, made, but it was still short of the requested or the needed amount. So can you share any highlights from your side? Are refugees still really top of mind when it comes to such gatherings?
Thanks, Samar. Yes, indeed. I mean, they are definitely on the top of the agenda still, in terms of at least the advocacy from the side of the international organizations and NGOs and other partners and civil society actors who are taking part, and on the part of the governments who are either hosting or contributing. Definitely they are. However, I think we have to come to terms with the fact that COVID will unfortunately make a dent in, I mean, we hope not, but I think we have to be prepared for the worst. It will make a dent in what is available for humanitarian funding. I think what we're trying to look at now is how much will that dent be? How can we work with other actors beyond the traditional humanitarian actors who we have relied on for many years, 10 years on into the crisis, and how we can work with others, how we can open up other opportunities, how we can work with development actors, the World Bank. We're really stepping up our strategic engagement with the bank and with the private sector in general. We have a super active private sector engagement team in the Middle East and North Africa, and they have really pushed us collectively to a new zone of engagement with the private businesses in the region. We hope to see that continue to grow. However, of course, the needs remain, they continue to outpace the funds available. So this continues to be a challenge, of course, and the choices that have to be made at the end of the day are very painful ones, when you have to choose between what gets cut when the funding isn't sufficient. And we hope that we can limit those choices to the extent possible and continue to advocate for continued funding and support.
And on the same topic of advocating for partnerships and supports, you're generally an advocate of, you know, localizing responses as Shaden. I know you wrote about this, you talked about this, and you started and activated the MENA Civil Society Displacement Network as well. We also, by the way, hosted a webinar with the AUB last month where we were discussing how we need to really, oh, I think we lost Shaden there. Yes, we lost her. Okay, we'll go back to Shaden in a bit. I think there was one question that I'd like Asala to reflect on, actually. Asala, how do we use, this is a question from the audience, from Louisa, how do we best use the example of NaTakallam to begin changing the narrative? Oh, welcome back, Shaden.
Sorry, my line got dropped for a minute.
No, it's okay. Okay, I had just moved on to Asala for a quick comment on a question that came through. Changing the narrative on refugees and asylum seekers. So really changing the story or the perception of what refugees are like. And I feel that obviously you see that positive effect that has come out from your engagement with NaTakallam. What would you say could be other initiatives rather than being looked at as passive victims? Are there any other stories that you can share with us from your own circle, family, friends?
Yes, yes, I have. Like, I think we like as a conversation partner with NaTakallam. Also, I have many friends, many people in Lebanon and everywhere. So there is, for example, my husband's brother. He left Syria without any document, without anything, and he should to be at home all the time, and he cannot work, he cannot find job. It was very difficult also for young man, we can say. So it's very difficult for them, for him. And after that, he started his work with NaTakallam, also as me. And after a little time, he tried to find something like to move from Lebanon also to go to find a new life, because it's not like to be at home all the time. You cannot find job, you cannot do relationships with another people. You cannot go on with your life like this for 2 years, 3 years. It's too much. So with NaTakallam, he had an interview with a journalist. This journalist is he was interesting about NaTakallam. He speak about his story, and he told him about a project who helps which helped the Syrian refugees to move to Italy safely without any problem, with all documents, without anything. So with NaTakallam, he found also this like we can say this opportunity to move to change all his life. Now he is student in university here in Italy, and he rent a home. He has his life. He has his friends. So his life is like it was big change for them. His life, it's now he has a new life, and he's happy, and he like he has a new life. He replayed his life here in Italy. So the same also for me, because I had the experience with my NaTakallam. I get a job here as Arabic teacher with 2 universities, with language school. I worked with also a project to teach Arabic for kids.
That's
so
amazing.
Yeah, so it in our like this new life for us, the people look to refugees as people waiting to someone give them money. No, no, we try to find our life. Just we try to replay our life. So I worked as volunteer. I worked as like Arabic teacher. And now with COVID-19, I lost my job. Yes, it's right. But at least I work with NaTakallam, so
No, it's
it's
amazing.
fine.
It's
Yeah.
wonderful, and you gotta
Yeah,
keep
it's
going.
very
And you gotta
important.
keep
Yeah.
spreading the word, of course. Thank you, Asala, so much. And I think I'll go back to Shaden with the question. We lost you there for a minute. So we were talking about civil society organizations and the role that they play, and I wanted to know that do they have a seat at the table now when it comes to policy making or policy design? What is UNHCR doing on engaging them? You talked about partnerships with the private sector, but I guess these are equally important.
Absolutely, Samar. And I think now, I would say 6 years into the establishment of the civil society, the MENA Civil Society Network for Displacement, I think we can say that there has been a really big change in how civil society is viewed by the organization in the midst of a crisis, and how we situate them at, as you mentioned, around the table. I think for many years, UNHCR was used to working with NGOs and civil society in a camp-based environment. I think the Syria crisis, and before that the Iraqi crisis to a similar degree, but really mainly the Syria crisis, catapulted the engagement with civil society actors in the region to a whole new level, given the fact that it's an urban environment and refugees are not based in camps, and the delivery of aid has shifted completely. We now work with cash much more than actual food basket delivery or non-food items. So the role of NGOs has shifted, of civil society in general has shifted, that's one. The nature of the environment has shifted from camp to urban, generally for the institution, and globally, actually, I would say, in many parts of the world. And then thirdly, there has been a recognition that we need a whole of society approach, that really no entity, whether it's the UN, whether it's a government, whether it's any other, can deal with these massive crises alone, that it really has to be a collaborative and comprehensive effort that respects the role and the responsibilities and the complementarities of each of the actors. So now we have civil society actors present at almost every single major policy-making event at headquarters, whether it's related to Syria or other crises around the region. We have a growing network who are really helping us shift the understanding as NaTakallam is, of who a refugee is, what they can contribute, how they can be of value to the community around them, and how we can think creatively about solutions also, because for many years we were very limited by what options were available. But I think now we have at least opened a few more doors, and we have recognized collectively through also the Global Compact on Refugees, I'm sure many of the participants are also familiar with it, there's been a general international recognition that the dynamics have to change, that everybody's role has to count. And that was actually the slogan for World Refugee Day, is every action counts, for this year. So really there's a strong appreciation of the value of civil society and their seat at the table of policy and decision making, not just in terms of implementing programs and interventions at the end of the day.
I mean, I can't believe we've already run out of time, by the way. So I'll since we're with you, Shaden, I'll ask you to give a final word maybe about what can the audience do to make a difference and how can they get involved? You touched upon this slightly, and while adding actually just one point from the second half of Louisa's question, which was confronting the stereotypes of refugees and asylum seekers who are viewed as either passive victims and or security threats, and to advocate for changes based on accountable protection frameworks. How can we actually confront these stereotypes? So if you can reflect on both in closing, please.
Sure. Thank you so much, Samar. And I wish we had more time. Actually, I'd be delighted to continue the conversation, but maybe we can do it at another point. I think maybe before I get to those last points, I'll just refer to a quote that I read recently, and it stuck with me, and I'm now using it frequently, and it's a Rumi quote. And he says that where there is ruin, there is hope for a treasure. And I found that to be very powerful, because it really builds on what Aline was saying. You know, there was a crisis, and it really started with something very small, but you kind of needed to dig in the midst of this ruin, of the midst of the crisis, to find the treasure of the individual contribution of refugees to this broader global situation. So building on that, I think everybody can contribute, whether through advocacy, whether sharing information, whether contributing financially, whether getting involved, whether using NaTakallam or other similar enterprises. But I think we have plenty of resources available on how individuals can do that. We welcome anybody's questions and concerns. Happy to have contact directly with anybody who would like further information. But really, just spread the word. Don't think that whatever you do is a drop in the ocean. Every action really does count.
Thank you so much, and I love the Rumi quote. Maybe I'll move on to Aline to give us also reflections on the same question, please.
I mean, I think Shaden put it perfectly, right? I mean, the problems are so immense, but you have to just keep doing your small actions, and you know, never underestimate that one small action can actually lead to ripple effects. And there's this constant obsession, especially when you're in the startup world, with numbers and huge impact straight up front. And what we've noticed that is our slow and steady growth and the ripple effects of the human connection has been tremendous and incredible. And you know, we also need to find ways to stop preaching the choir only and getting to the others. And you know, as an American, I don't really know where to hide today with the current leadership we have, but you know, just thinking kind of crazy and outside the box is enabling us to, you know, bring in the voices of those who are so often demonized by our political leaders into classrooms, changing the youth early on. And yeah, I think it's just exactly you know what Shaden said, which is it never just think it's a drop in the ocean, and you just got to keep going. So so yeah, so thank you you know, for having us. And yeah, that's.
And Asala, if you have any closing remarks about what you would advise people about maybe how to help or how to change this perception of refugees, and I'll follow you with mine.
Okay, so as they said, we need just a chance, just small things to do, and we can do many things. Also, no one would like to be refugees. It's not easy to lift your family, lift your country, and lift everything, and to go to live in new life, new culture. It's big challenge for us when we arrived here to learn Italian, to do many things. So sometimes the people like don't understand really the refugees issue, or they try to do all their best to support. Sometimes small things will do a lot. So maybe with some projects like NaTakallam and some small organizations, maybe they can do a lot for refugees. And also, like, we need a lot of, like, open your heart and open your mind and think about these people. Like there are a lot of people become refugees, but for many reasons, poverty, war, and many reasons. So no one would like to be refugees, but it's happened.
100% true. And to maybe close from my end, I totally second that nobody can ever put themselves in the shoes of a refugee. And I'd like to close with a story, actually, that was shared by my 93-year-old grandfather when he was leaving Bir al-Saba in Palestine, which is Bir Sheba. My grandfather was about to leave the house with his children. My father was a few days old in 1948, and my grandmother was all bejeweled, wearing gold jewelry. And my grandfather said, "Take off this jewelry. We cannot leave the house with you wearing all this jewelry and we're carrying the children. We'll put it in our safe box and we'll come back for it, I'm sure." But it was just the shelling and so on, so they had to leave. She took off all the jewelry she was wearing, put it in that safe box, and left the house. and obviously they never made it back there. So this is exactly what a refugee's life is like. You leave and you don't know if you're ever going to return. So with that, I say show empathy, show love, and always challenge the negative stereotypes. So thank you all so much for a wonderful session. I think this could have gone on for another hour at least. I just want you to know that there are a couple of questions that came in, but unfortunately we won't be able to address those. But if you can please email us at info@sheisarab.com, and I'll make sure to redirect your questions. I'll also include NaTakallam's email in the follow-up email to this session. So thank you once again, and the recording will be available on She is Arab's YouTube channel. Thank you, Shaden, thank you, Aline, and thank you, Asala.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
all. I'm very happy to be with you today, and also I'm happy to say, like a lot of my students, they enjoyed for us. So thanks for all, and I'm happy to be with you today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Asala. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Bye.